And yet, if you take solid wood and laminate pieces of solid wood up, there's just a lot more interest built into it. I like to include a thing they call inclusions, knots, and maybe a little bit of sap line, something that makes that project look nice. If somebody were coming to something at my house to look at something I made or I'd given it, and they look at it and they say, boy, that's really nice. Is that real wood? Just stab me. You know, because plywood looks so perfect all the time that it kind of takes the illusion away of something that you made. But making something out of a glued up set of boards, this one we'll talk about different ways, but different types of grain and color and things just add some life, a little bit more humanity to a project, and I think it's pretty cool. The problem is trying to take solid wood and glue it up and keep it flat. I think that's been the issue for a long time. So the technique I want to show you is not an involved one. But what it does, it shows you how, generally speaking, to take regular wood and glue it up into solid forms that stay as flat as these are. And I'm going to hopefully show you without biscuits and dowels and splines and all the things that you thought you needed. Okay? I'm going to wash glue joints. It'll drive you crazy, but we'll talk about that part of it too. And I do a lot of my joinery on the table saw, which is going to annoy people also. And the idea is that you have these tools. The thought's always been, well, I've got to have this domino, I've got to have this and this and this to do it. And to be honest, I don't think a lot of that is necessary. And again, I have a pretty graphic demonstration at the end, a little video on to show you how I test those glue ups to see whether or not they hold up. So, the only way to get flat panels is to buy flat wood. And it sounds kind of silly to say that, but the fact is a lot of you are intimidated when you go into a lumber yard, when you know that the person that owns that yard has got his hands on his hips thinking, come on, pal, make a decision. You know, you're never going to buy the top sheet of plywood in any stack ever, because that top sheet is always twisted. It's always got some kind of a warp to it. So you go through the first couple of pieces right off the bat, and you go to that one that's a lot flatter, and that's a good idea. But a lot of times when you look at wood, you're not being quite as critical. And if you've got a board with a very slight little bow or a little cup or a twist, you're never going to get that board to operate and stay flat, because it's going to stay the way you bought it. So my feeling is, you should be the customer that if you came into a store and you own that store, you wouldn't want you as a customer, because you need to look at every board. If you've got a board, a length of board that's maybe 6 feet long, and you can push on the center of it a little bit, meaning you can take that real slight little bow out of there, you're thinking, yeah, that's good. I'm going to cut it into 2-foot pieces anyway, it'll be fine. If that board already had the tendency to start cupping at that length, even those shorter sections have some form of that cup, so that when you, or that bow, so when you now try and join those or machine them on a table saw or router, they're going to fight you. So the idea is to look for as solid a wood as possible and as flat a wood without twists or cups. I never buy a board with a twist. That's a board that when it's lying flat on its plane, it's kind of twisted on the ends. Well, you can buy 2 inches thick and not get a 3/4 inch board out of that. And you have to have all the tools to be able to do that. So eliminate those potentials. So be that obnoxious person and buy perfect stock. The thing that made those things bow a lot of times when they're in a lumberyard is that if they come from the mill or they come from the place where they've been warehoused into the store, they're stored flat like this. It's the most efficient way to store them. But because they're stored flat and because the humidity wherever they were warehoused is different than the place that they're now being displayed, the top of that top board is going to react to that moisture. It's going to go into the board or kind of come out of it normally. But because it's lying flat on the top and protected on all the rest of the sides, only that top surface is going to react to it. So it's going to cup up like this, it's going to bow like this, or worse yet, it's going to twist. So when you buy that lumber and you buy it nice and straight, if you bring it back to your shop and you stack it the same way it was stored, it's going to do that to you too. You bought it nice and flat, and the humidity in your own shop is going to be different than the way that's in the store. This is how I store my lumber. It's horribly inefficient, takes up more space than ever, but these are little 3/4 by 3/4 pieces of scrap, and you make plenty of scrap. You make more scrap than a project. You probably have a lot of material to do this with. But the idea is, if I stack it all this way, all 6 sides, the ends, the sides like this, and the top and bottom, can take in or give off moisture evenly. The humidity in my shop is different. My shop is on the 2nd floor of my barn and behind my home. I have a 1st floor where the kids had their chickens and sheep when they were little, and the stalls in there are where I store my lumber. I don't heat that or air condition it, and during the summertime, the temperature and humidity are 90, and during the wintertime, the temperature and humidity are 0. So the wood is fatter during the summer than it is in the winter, just taking in and giving off moisture forever. And in my shop on the 2nd floor, I heat that, though I don't air condition it, so the humidity is different up there too. All of the lumber in my stalls, and I'm a bit of a hoarder. If somebody offers me wood, I don't care what it is, I'll take it. but it's all stored like this, which is terribly inefficient. It takes up a lot of room, but it's flat. When I bring it up to my shop, I sticker it up there for a day or two more. So that now it does in the shop what it was supposed to do here and what it did in the store if it's going to be staying nice and flat, okay? So the idea is just to be picky about it, and then when you store it well enough so it's going to stay flat. Second thing is, this is called red oak. And red oak is a misnomer. All of these boards are oak. It is red, it's tan, it's brown, it's yellow. And if you're building a small project and you find a little sale bin that has all of these scrap pieces of oak, and you buy them thinking I'm going to glue those all up, they'll look pretty flat. They'll be nice and flat when they're there. But because of all those different colors, and most likely a lot of different little porosities in there, they're not going to be consistent. So now you're stuck with that spot. Am I going to stain a little bit of one and then maybe not the other, and then put a stain over the whole thing and see if I can make them more consistent? You're fighting yourself the whole time. So the consideration here is, if you're building a small project, try and find the red oak or the cherry or whatever that has the same general color. So when you're putting that project together, at least you're starting out with something that you can work from, okay? Second thing is look for grain. Here is an example of a piece of wood that's been glued up without any relevance for grain. This is nice and flat. Again, red oak. Look at all the different colors in red oak. But the point is, here's some cathedral grain facing up here. Here's some cathedral facing down in this spot. And here's this part on the other end that's a little bit more straight. The glue up here with a little bit of playing with it, a little bit of organization to it, would have made a much more coherent way to put something together that looks a little bit more interesting. So when somebody comes up and looks at a project you made, what I want them to say when they look at that is they say, boy, that's really pretty, because I take that as a compliment. As opposed to saying, huh, did you make that yourself? And it's subtle, but because all of those different grains are kind of all over the place without any kind of look at them to try and make them a little bit more consistent, you're adding to that. And I don't mean to pick on a Home Depot or something, but look at the kitchen cabinets there. The cabinets are exceptionally functional. The railed and style joinery is terrific. The finish is great. But then look at that same set of cabinets at a custom cabinet shop, and something just kind of jumps out because they took a little bit more time for the grain. They took a little bit more time for the color. Same project, everything's the same, but just a little bit more of an interest to it. Most of you are doing what I'm doing. You're building one or two of something, okay? That little bit of time spent in there makes such a huge difference in the way that project looks, all right? We're gonna stay with this kind of theme the whole time, and that's the example I'll show you at the very end of this. This is cypress. I live outside Chicago area, so I bought some of this. A lot of different colors, a lot of different grains. The idea here is that these are random boards. The idea too is that you can see in here that they've got different colors to them, and you can see the grain differences. This is cathedral figure here. This is the center part of the tree, what they would call the pith, P-I-T-H. You can always tell it's flat sawn or plain sawn because the grain runs horizontally across the end. So that's the center part of the tree, give or take. This part here is a straighter grain, and this is called rift sawn, R-I-F-T. It's a little bit straighter on the outside. It comes on the outside edge of the tree. By kind of playing with those and orienting them in certain directions, you can wind up with a much more pleasant type of glue up. And again, I know I'm running a bit afoul of the actual glue up part, but we'll get there. If I just glue those up, laid out the way that they are, it's going to be flat. But because of all these different grain differences, it's going to be odd, okay? At least to me. I taught this class earlier this year, whatever city we were in, and on a Friday. And a guy comes in on Saturday, and the first thing he does is walk up to me and he said, "You're a jerk." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because now I just looked at my stuff at home." And don't do that. And he said, "Now," he said, "it's flat though." And I said, "No, they are, but just that little bit of time will make a difference." So anyway, there's one glue up that's kind of odd. Here's one that looks on its surface to be odd. Here's some of that straighter grain, and here's some of this cathedral type look on the side. Most of you would never put anything together like that. But think of maybe two nightstands on either side of the bed, and these two nightstands have mirror images made up this way that actually they make your eye kind of towards the bed. They have a little bit of look to it. This is the same kind of thing with a change to it, but it's a lot more normal, if you will. Or the cathedral's in the middle, and these two outside edges here are straight. This to me would be the perfect thing for doors. If you're doing a project with a lot of doors on it, that's some way to put some straight grain along with some of that cathedral. While I'm thinking of it too, whenever you're doing a project with cathedral grain, make sure it's always pointing up, people psychologically feel better when the grain is pointing up. Think stock market, not down. And the other worst part is, I mean, this is bad. This is much better, but this is much worse, where there is no semblance. They're not all facing up. They're not all facing down. They're everywhere. You'll have a stroke looking at something with that kind of thing. So when you're doing these, just make sure that the grain is always facing up. Point is, these would make great doors someplace. And again, if you're going to do that, all of these should be the same. They should have about the same proportion of that cathedral in the middle, along with some straighter grain on the outside to give this project a little bit more sameness, if you will. Here's another way to glue something up. This is a little bit of that figure on either side, and then the straighter grain in the middle. Okay. Here is what I wanted. This is the heart of this. I normally will only do glue ups with 3 boards at a time. I like to do 3 boards because they only have 2 seams, and I can use my finger and my thumb to make sure that those seams are as close together as even as possible when I'm putting the clamps on them. Because if I'm trying to glue 4 or 5 boards up at one time, and I've got a great set of clamps, if I don't get every one of those glue up boards perfect, and I'm off by a 1/16 someplace across that entire top, it means I went from 3/4 down to 5/8, because I had to take a 1/16 off both sides. And that's to make it flat, not to make it smooth yet. So the idea is I can get closer. The other thing is, I'm gonna lay these out, these 3 boards out, so that the color and the grain are exactly what I want. I wanna look at that right away and figure this is perfect. And the nice part is, I don't care about what the end grain does. When I was much younger, and probably when you were too, they taught everybody at that time that you had to alternate every other grain. That was the idea. The reason was, if the middle board wanted to cup up, that if you put a board whose grain ran opposite directions on either side of it, somehow it would keep that middle board from doing something stupid. And even if it worked, what did the outside boards register to? Because ultimately it's over. You have to have outside boards, so why didn't they do something dumb? So my thing here is, I will leave these exactly the way I want them and pay no attention to the grain on the ends, because normally I don't want my boards to be any more than 3 or 4 inches to 5 inches wide. If you look at a 1x10 across its end grain, any lumberyard, almost all of these are going to have a slight little cup to them. Okay. When you look at a board across its face, you've got the center of the board, that pith part. You've got the outside edges here. There's early and late growth built into it. They're taking moisture in and giving it off always, regardless of the finish. And as they do that, on that side wide board, it's somewhat irregular. The porosity is across the face of it. And because the board's taking off and taking in moisture a little bit unevenly, you get this slight little cup. Okay, that's the way it is. But if you look at a 1x10 in relation to its thickness, it's getting a little bit easier to find a flat one. 1x6, maybe a little bit better. But by the time you get down to a 4 or 5 inch wide board, in relation to their thickness, they're pretty flat. If you look at this is that pith part, that curl in the center here. This is pretty irregular right here. But in relation to its thickness, it's pretty regular across its face. So it's going to give in and take off moisture a little slower or faster on the outsides, but it doesn't make any difference because it's doing it over its own width. You're not going to have any problems here. Okay? So and don't hold me to this. That's not that you can't use a 4.5 or 3.5 or something, but if you can confine them to about 4 inches wide or so, they're not going to do anything dumb, and you can leave this exactly the way it is. I don't know if you do it now, but I know that everybody did this when they looked at a board and they thought, God, that's perfect. And then, oh no, that's right. I've got to turn this board over to get the grain to go the opposite way. But the opposite side of that board had sap in it, had a grain that didn't look quite right, or had some color difference. And then you took this board and put it over here, and moved this one over, and thought, well, that doesn't work. Then you turn this one this way, all trying to watch the end grain. I don't think it means anything. These are my boards. There are 4 of them here. They're all dead flat. If you know anything about the shows, we have a horrific schedule. Everything goes back in this black crate. We did it one stretch where we went from Columbus to New Jersey to Houston to Minneapolis, where the humidity was everywhere. These boards are taking and giving off moisture. They should have exploded because I didn't worry about which part the grain did. They're flat. So when you narrow those boards, it really does help some. Here's the issue though. This is one big wide board. I believe everybody, woodworkers in general, they make things by emotion. We're an emotion-driven species. When my dad, just before my dad died, he planted a tree in the backyard of our house, and it was called a Russian olive. I don't know if anybody knows about those, but they're awful trees, terrible trees. In fact, it's like a big bush that grew taller. They have spikes in them that if you got stuck with them, they got infected. The branches broke off all the time, and there were 7 of us little idiots at home that were constantly falling out of there and hurting ourselves. And we kept telling my mom, please cut the tree down. And she said, I can't, that's Dad's tree. You know, he's looking down from, no, he's not. He's not watching that tree, Mom. We need to take the tree down. Well, fortunately, a big storm came and knocked it down. So that was the end of the problem. Well, I milled up that lumber, and the following Christmas, I made ornaments for everybody in the family, including my mom. And that was an ornament for Dad's tree. And I mean, she lost her mind over it. My brothers did too, but for different reasons. They're also woodworkers, and they know that I'm the oldest, and Mom loves me more than the rest of them. and I play that all the time, so this was a great way to do it. But the point is that that's what we do. So let's just say you've got this big 10-inch wide board, and the odds are, because it's pretty wide, it's going to probably work. But you want to make something out of that. That came from Dad's tree, that came from a neighbor's tree, or trying to make something sentimental for them over it. And the fact is that you're going to have a hard time doing that because the board at that width is probably going to do something stupid. Excuse the analogy, but if I were to cut my leg off and glue it together again real quickly before I bled to death, it would still look like a leg, but it wouldn't operate like one anymore, okay? I would have taken out whatever the top part talks to the bottom part. Here's this wide board, this is it here. That's, give or take a 10-inch wide board. Here's one of those inclusions. Putting that in a glue up is a pretty cool thing. Somebody comes up and touches it, they can see right away there's something interesting in it. And when I laid it on my table saw, it sat up from flat about 1/8 of an inch or so in that 10-inch wide part. The fact is that most of you know that there's no way to clamp that out or glue that out because the board is dynamic. It's going to expand and contract with those seasonal humidity changes forever, and that's going to cause a problem. So what I did with this was I cut it in half. It's kind of hard to tell where I cut it in half here. And then I put it back together again. So now it lies flat on the table. And again, I know you're not supposed to attribute human emotions to inanimate objects, but I took away its memory of warping. It's now looking like a 10-inch board, but it's acting like 2 5s, okay? Because of their relatively narrow widths. They're not really going to do anything really strange. And the fact that they were 10 probably would have caused that problem. I took that away. This is the board. It's dead flat. It's still here, so this is that table that you could make when somebody wanted to get something made for them that means something to them that you're making. This is the way to do it. And if somebody looks at that now and says, boy, that's beautiful, nice job, say thank you and shut up. We talked about this in another thing. Don't right away tell them you should have seen how warped it was before. Shoot, I had to cut the center out of this and I re-glued it. In fact, if you look real closely here, you can see the line. Shut up. In fact, here's the spot, which is kind of hard to see right here. So you can see where the grain line kind of jumps up in here. There is a difference when you're cutting something and putting it back together again. If you've got that cathedral grain, it breaks the cathedral. Okay, because you cut 1/8 of an inch out and just by the saw blade, and if you have to rejoint it to get it go back together again. But if you take that, let's see if it shows better here. If you take that board and run them like up against each other like this, you can put that cathedral back. Okay, you may have to cut a little off the top and the bottom, but the point is you can make this board look exactly like it looked before and dead flat. So in effect, it's operating like 2 5s, but it looks just like the old 10-inch wide board. Okay, one last thing, and I swear we'll get to the joinery part of this. This is a pretty wide board, or at least was at one time. This is that outside edge of the tree over here. This is a little bit more of the center of the pith. This probably at one time, this is again oak, was a huge board. And at the mill, it was cut here. This would have been flipped the other way, so a big wide board. When I told you originally that when you're gluing up something and you've got that cathedral in it, that it would have made nice doors on there. It would not make good drawers, drawer fronts, to me. Here's this shoe. If you're making glue ups as drawer fronts, which way does the cathedral go? Does it all go this way? Does it all go this way? If you're fortunate enough, do they match this way? Do they spread out this way? There's too much in this. But if you use the same wood, same cut of wood, same species and everything. Buy a wider board and use this part that riffs on the outside edge as your rails and stiles or your glue-ups. Then you have this kind of a drawer front, which is a lot straighter across, okay? It's got the same colors, same proportions, same density, everything, just without that curl in it that gets a little bit confusing. Make it a whole lot easier to put a project together that got some semblance of order. Now, if you order boards though, that are just riffs on, this part here, you pay between 30 and 40% more per board foot, okay? Because you bought the entire board, but the only part you took home was this part. So it costs more to do that, the mill is charging more. So my thing is, go through those stacks at the lumberyard and look closer. You're gonna find boards that look like this, spend that money and buy the whole board. Then when you cut this here and make these your rails and stiles or your glue ups, and then use this more figured stuff for jewelry boxes and drawer sides and those kind of things, at least you're getting your whole use out of that material, okay? All right, glue up. Questions, just yell, please. Here is our 3 boards. Again, I like to do just 3 at one time. This is all that cypress stuff. Again, the nice part about 3 boards is I can watch the seams, make sure it's pretty flat. I only care that these joints fit perfectly on either side, so they're jointed perfectly. You're gonna mark them in whatever order you want so you can put them back that way. The nice part is I don't care about the outside edges at all. I just care that these 2 match in these 2, and I want them to match so nicely that with hand pressure alone, you can't see light between the seams, okay? You can get that kind of joinery on a joiner or on a table saw, and I prefer to use the table saw on mine. I have a joiner. I have a 6-inch Delta joiner. Works really well, there's nothing wrong with it, but because my shop looks a lot like yours, I can't get to my joiner. Because every horizontal surface in the woodworking shop is a storage area, and a lot of stuff is stored up against it. Plywood, that's the way it is. So the issue, for a lot of you that don't know, the only clear space in your entire shop is an area this big around your table saw blade. I mean, that's it. If you made a chair that's flat on the top, you plan on sitting on it, you've never sat on it, because it's got wood scrap, it's got plans on it, a cardboard box or something, and if it falls off of there, you won't put it away, you put everything back on that chair. That's the way we are. And if you cut something on your table saw and you slide your fence to the right, something fell off the right side of your fence. And you can't even cut something wide on the left because there's something over there you have to go all the way to. So the point is, my joiner isn't this one spot that gives me a problem. The other problem I have with it is joiners have a formula, an unwritten type formula. The longest board that is relatively easy to join on a joiner will not exceed 50% longer than the bed of that joiner. So in my case, I have a 6-inch joiner, it's got a 6-inch cutter. It's got a 2-foot in feet and 2 feet out feet, normal type joiner. So if you add 50% of that, you've got a 6-foot long board. So for fun, this is a 1x4, 6 feet. 2 feet go on the inboard side of that joiner. 4 feet's hanging off the outside. You have to hold it down on the table and up against the fence, but as soon as you press the cutter, no more pressure can be on the in-feed side. It all has to go to the out-feed side. Otherwise, you have big snipes, or you create 2 edges that match in the middle and the back. So now you're trying to keep it from falling off here and trying to keep it from diving off the other side. And you can't use a roller stand or an extension, because unless they're as flat as that joiner top, they're either diving into or climbing out of that cut. Okay? So the issue is, it's really hard to do that. But if I have my table saw, and I've got an off-feed table on the back side, gravity holds it down. I don't care anymore about the outside edge of that. I just send it through, and that table saw blade cuts a dead straight, perfectly jointed edge on that out of a 2x10, 10 feet long, which I'd never be able to get in my joiner. The other problem with your joiner is, if you do a 6-foot long piece, that's 12 feet of travel. That's 6 feet on one side and 6 feet on the other side. You don't have 12 feet in your shop, nobody does. You do, but you have extension cords and 5-gallon bucket in the way and all these other things that'll never keep you from getting to that. And a lot of you have joined a board to a point where it's actually almost coming to a point at one end because you just can't get those boards to go together. Table saw does it. Again, I'm not saying that one is better than another one. And if you came here to buy a table saw because you need it for joinery, please buy one, because you gotta have it. That way I won't get in trouble with the people on the show floor. If you've got a good table saw, it's fine. The big issue on a table saw is this. When you first set up your table saw, everybody, you made sure it was 90 degrees to the blade, to the table. But if you've ever taken that off of 90 degrees, 30 degrees, 45, something, and put it back up again, there's a real good chance it's not back at 90. A lot of those old saws have a very rudimentary way of adjusting them. They have a screw thread. There's a stop on there with a little Allen wrench on it that indexes someplace up against a plate of some kind. Anything that gets on there, the sawdust and plywood, the pitch or gum from cherry or poplar or something, or pine, anything that gets on there can keep that from indexing back at 90 again. And you think it's there. So now you join your boards through there, you cut boards through there, and when you lay them together to glue them, you'll find that the top edges meet, but the bottoms are away just a hair. And as soon as you put pressure on them, you close that opening, which means your glued up thing starts to rise. So the difference is, if you've ever taken it off 90 degrees, put it back up there and put a square back up to check it. Okay? I had going to a show not long ago. Some guy comes up and he said, after the presentation, and he said, well, I just look at that cursor. You know, I know the cursor's right 90 degrees. And don't take this poorly, but you know how many fingers you have. But at most of our ages, you can't count those fingers at arm's length. You can't see that far. And you can't see down in there either. It makes it really hard. There's no way to know. So whenever you take it off, just put it back. The same is true with a joiner. The fence needs to be 90 degrees to the table, period. And I know in our magazine occasionally we'll do it. We'll talk about how to use what they call complementary angles. So if I'm your joiner at table saw, your blade is just almost at 90. So let's just say 89. If the other board is flipped opposite, its cut is at 91. So in theory, you have 89, 91, so you have 180. In practice, when you clamp them together, they have a tendency to slide. That's that little knife, little edge you can feel. The more pressure, the worse it gets. But when they're 90 degrees, they butt. There's no slipping on it. So the point is, if you're making sure that you're going to joint something, make sure the blades are at 90. Don't always work on what the symptom is, trying to fix that by knowing, well, at least it's 180, or it's a complementary angle, I know I can fix that. The fact is you can't. You're going to fight that the entire glue up, and that's what causes a lot of your problems, okay? So just make sure that it's back at 90 again. I do it every time. I don't take mine off of 90 as often, maybe, but when it does go back up, I make sure I check. And the other thing is, in days of old, we all used a planer blade, a joiner blade. When you're ripping wood with its grain, a lot of the debris that comes off there is a little bit strandier, and you need more space between the teeth, a deeper gullet or something to get rid of that sawdust as the blade goes around. When you're cutting end grain, the stuff is a little bit more granular. Now, any good 40 or 50 tooth combination saw blade combines the geometry and stuff of the teeth along with the gullet sizes that you can use that one blade for ripping and cross-cutting. The more teeth always means a cleaner cut or a better cut, and the better the joint here, the nicer the glue up is going to be. If I can use a 40 or 50 tooth blade on there, I'll definitely do it. If you've got a joiner blade, Freud, I think, has what they call a glue line rip blade. It's made for that. They're great. It's 24 teeth or 28 teeth, whatever, and they're fine. They're just fine. But if you don't have one, I just don't know that it's necessary to go out and buy one to do that joinery when a table saw blade, the way they're designed in the last 10 or 15 years or so, will do it for you, okay? So again, I don't know if that fits the normal way of doing things, but to me, I do it. On my little joiner, it's fine. For little short boards, I'll run them past there without a problem. But when you're doing something with any length to it, you're never gonna get them. I have one of the guys that I know, a guy named Tommy Mack. I know that they probably play his stuff here. He's a friend of mine. He did a thing not long ago where they jointed a couple of boards on the joiner. He put them together, and then he used a big smoothing plane, big fat smoothing plane, and took a couple licks out of the center of it. Because the thought at the time was that when you put boards together that touched at the top and bottom, and were away a little bit in the center, when you clamp the center, you put more pressure at the top and bottom, which made it easier to clamp that, because it's hard to clamp at the very top and bottom. The technique was called a spring fit at the time. Well, I know this is human emotions kind of thing, but we have great clamps, and we can take a board that's away an inch at the middle and clamp it together. But for the life of that project, we're asking the glue to keep that board from going back to the way it always was. So again, I know you're not supposed to do that, but I believe the board has a sense of humor. It lets you think for a short time that, yep, that worked, and yet it's not going to. It's going to go back. So you let some tension in there. If you joint boards, a joiner or table saw, to where they fit to a point where you can't see light between them with just hand pressure. The glue just holds it there. It's not trying to keep it from going back to where it was. And I have no scientific proof for any of this, but the things that I've been doing for, God, forever, I haven't had them separate, I haven't had them come apart, I haven't had them do anything dumb. So whatever I'm doing seems to work fairly well for me. Don't ever change anything, just as a hint. Whenever you go to any of these presentations, but mine in particular, if you feel that there's a need to change, because some other little short Italian is going to tell you there's another way to do it, and you're going to change that or something else. If what you're doing works for you, don't change. But if the things you're doing are kind of hit and miss for you, I think some of the things I'm showing you here is going to help a little bit, okay? So let's do the joinery now that we've got these done. Again, something maybe a little bit different than what again, this is the idea here where I can kind of use my finger and thumb to make sure that these edges fit nice and tight. A couple real fast things. Here's a couple of things I'm hoping you won't do. I don't know that you need to. Getting extra glue surface area. A lot of people feel that just the 3/4 edge here isn't enough. So one of the ways to do it and to strengthen and align a joint was to use dowels. This is a dowel jig I've had for almost 40 years, I think. It does anything from 1/8 inch all the way up to 1/2 inch holes perfectly in the middle of a board. The problem is that you can't find dowels to fit the hole anymore. They should sell all the dowel little packages with a little razor knife, because either they're too loose and you fill a hole full of glue, or use a razor knife to shave off those little knurls that are in there because you have to almost pound it in the hole. So the idea is, I just don't know if these work. And if you're joining up glue ups, so that you're using 3 dowels, because you usually use them in odd numbers to be able to put the pieces together. And if they don't line up exactly right, you're using that same razor knife to pull some of that dowel apart just to be able to get the joint together. I just don't know, and you'll see in a minute, where I don't think it gives you what you need. Again, if that's the way you work and it works for you, I think you should, but I don't know that I would go out and buy a doweling jig just to do this. The most popular way probably to do it is with biscuit joints. It's become really popular. When I bought mine a long time ago, they gave you 250 free biscuits to entice you to buy that thing. And if you're also like me, you still probably have about 200 of those biscuits because it seemed like a good idea at the time and not using them as much anymore. The issue is biscuits are made, the biscuit joiners themselves work 2 ways. Mine indexes on a flat surface. So I put everything on my bench. I set my biscuit joiner on there and set the wood on there, and I plunge the biscuit joiner in to cut that slot. Some of the biscuit joiners have a tongue on them and they plunge into wood, but they're normally set, generally speaking, for something 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. This piece of cypress is a little bit thicker, so my line here is a little bit fatter on the top than it is on the bottom, which just means when you're using a biscuit joiner, if that's what you feel you need to do, mark your wood so that you're always indexing against the same face, okay? So if mine indexes against a flat surface, I'm gonna put my good side down on all of those so that I'm sure that when I get done with it, I've got them even. But the problem I found, we were just in Houston a little while ago, in Atlanta, which makes it's easier there to understand it. The fact is, these are pressed beechwood, those little biscuits, under hydraulic pressure with no humidity. Sometimes just lying on your workbench makes them start to spread just a bit. So you may find that these biscuits don't go in that perfect slot. And if they don't go in there well, and if you add glue to it, which makes them expand even faster, a lot of you are using your clamps just to try and get the boards together to overcome the fact that the biscuit's expanding. And if these aren't exactly set up and you're slightly off, you can't fix that joint, because biscuits only will move, and only for a short time, move lengthwise. They don't allow any up and down movement at all. Again, I think the concept itself is a good one, but the fact is it doesn't work as well as it could. I use these occasionally for alignment. If I'm doing a real big glue up and I've got long boards, I may put biscuits in there to kind of help get them together to start with, but I won't glue them because they're already starting to expand. Nobody's fast enough to kind of get that stuff going real quickly. If I leave the glue off of this and I glue all of this area, the glue surface here, that edge grade, and then I clamp them together, squeezing that glue is going to wind up in parts over here anyway. And to be honest, that's all to me I think these are good for, is alignment. They don't do anything to strengthen the joint. And again, I'll show you in a little while what I'm talking about. Okay. Again, I think they're great tools. I wouldn't feel bad if you have one, but the fact is that I think they've got a little bit of limitation. This is the last one on increasing glue surface area. This is a router bit. Think tongue and groove, those kind of things that everybody felt would give you more glue surface area. They do, but I don't know that you need it. This is the wavy edge here. It creates kind of a convoluted little edge, a lot more glue surface area here. The space between the height of these cutters is about 1/4 inch. So you run board A past there, and then you run board B past there, sitting atop a 1/4 inch piece of tempered hardboard. So it kind of makes up for that difference. What it does is it allows you now, when you lay these out, to have a lot more glue surface area when they go together. Okay, so you can increase it on how much, but a percentage. The point is, when you glue that together and clamp it, the joint kind of goes away and it's flat on the top and the bottom. Glue surface, extra things, everything works. The problem is, the only reason that that worked is because the board was about 1 foot long. Anything longer than that doesn't work. Because if you're doing it on a router table, unless you've got it dead flat against that router table and up against the fence, as you're pushing that board past there, if there's any movement in that board at all, you're putting that center slightly above or below the middle of the board, like putting the tongue a little higher or the groove a little higher. If that board is off when you do it, everything that you did to increase glue surface area goes away because you have to sand so much of that because you've lost the alignment part. So again, I think in theory it's awesome. In practice, maybe not so much. Unless you came here to buy one of those bits, and I think you gotta have them. Okay, just think it's the best bit ever. So otherwise, some of the vendors are going to be complaining already that we're never selling anything, and now you're telling them not to. So I think that they're awesome. I just don't know that I would go out and get one if you didn't have to. Okay. So here's our glue up. You'll see that the first 2 boards actually fit so nicely that I don't even have the clamps on them yet. They're together. This one is even here. The second thing that will make these go together and be nice and flat is the clamps. Please understand, I am not selling the brand. I'm selling the concept. This is called a bar clamp or a parallel clamp, and the idea is that the bases of these sit flat on a flat surface. So if they are sitting, and the ones I'm using, they sit flat on a flat surface. The bar here is now parallel to that flat surface, and the glue up when it sits on the bar is also parallel to that. So as flat as the substrate you're gluing from, what you're sitting to, is what the top is going to look like. A lot of you, and I have tons of them, are using pipe clamps. There's nothing wrong with them. Their ability to clamp something is awesome, but they sit on 2 little feet. And sometimes when you turn the crank on them, it moves that center a little bit, so they don't quite sit flat. So you're not sure anymore whether or not what you're clamping up is flat anymore because the clamps are kind of sitting uneven. And I know there's a whole bunch of different ways to use them that will stop that, but if they are black pipe clamps, they leave black oxide rings on everything, which just increases the fun of woodworking because you can't get those dumb things off either. And the galvanized pipes are expensive. So the issue is, if you have something flat like this, it sits flat on a flat surface and allows you to do that. The problem with this idea is that they are expensive. They run between $20 and $30 a clamp, or $30 and $40 a clamp. And for most people, that puts it out of range. When I first got my clamps, and they weren't available, this kind of thing, when I first started buying them, I bought them in sets. So I would buy a set for me, and I would send my wife twice a year a nice little thank you note for having bought me a Christmas gift and a birthday gift. Because I know I'm not going to give her the money to go buy clamps because I'm afraid what she'll come back with. Much like I have a hard time buying the right bread. So I know my spot, and so that's the idea. And they're available now on eBay, which you're not seeing when I was much younger, but they're available on eBay, and they are because most older woodworkers are dying off here. And you're going to find them. It's just hard to make sure that you're getting a ready supply, but you never know what's going to be there. The good part on buying them on eBay is that they're going to be really cheap. Clamps are really cheap, and mainly for the reason that, and it buys in my case more than anybody's, is that when a woodworker dies, their wife will sell her tools for what they told her he paid for them. So you know that they're going to be. I've never bought a clamp that costs more than $10. So they'll be used. So she'll say, well, just $5. I hope that's okay. So the idea, that's the point. I travel quite a bit. My wife's got a fetish for chairs and lamps too. And I know she said she's never paid more than $50 for one of those either. And I know, so it's a lie we both do. We both know how that works. So I have my realm, she's got hers, and everybody's happy. So the point is, you can possibly find them there. One of the only drawbacks with these, other than the price, is that the little knurls on the top here, are where the claws and this head kind of grip as you tighten that clamp up. And if they get filled with glue, they just don't operate well at all. They either don't clamp really well or it's hard to slide them. So what I'll do on mine is to just use a little bit of painter's tape underneath the edges of where those seams go together so the glue that does drop on there can peel off right away, okay? I've got some that with the old, that I didn't pay much attention to, and you can use a razor knife and kind of knock it off, and probably that's what people do, or a scraper. The point is it doesn't get all of that off, and it just makes it hard sometimes to clamp them. So if you're buying that kind of stuff, then buy good stuff. So anyway, here's our three things. There's our tape in place here. And when I glue this is probably slightly different than what you're used to seeing. I apply glue to one surface only, and I use my finger to smush that glue. And because I know that these boards already, by just hand pressure, fit without a lot of pressure, this is how I can spread the glue from one side to the other. And the point is, doing that allows, when I clamp this up, to have, for all intents and purposes, individual beads of glue at the top and the bottom. Much easier to get off, and we'll talk about that in a second. Much easier to get off, and much easier to keep them having what they call ghost lines or drip marks in there that are going to show up underneath finishes. Most of you are putting way too much glue on. And the point is, by doing it this way, you greatly eliminate that potential for too much glue. And the nice part is, here it is, and here's what it looks like smushed out. So, and how much easier this is than doing 5 or 6 boards. While you've got them on pipe clamps. If you do, you're a saint. And you're trying to put glue on each one of those, and the bottle slips off the edges as you're doing it, so now you've got glue running down the front and the back. You bend over to do board number 3, and board number 1 and 2 falls down while you're trying to do it, and the glue's setting up all this time. This is a lot easier, okay? And I use my finger because it's the only tool I won't lose in my shop, okay? I had somebody a couple weeks ago say, well, you could lose it on the table saw. Yeah, thanks so much. The idea is, and somebody finally posted this. It was cool, and I finally saw it. Somebody posted it, so I put it up. And this couldn't apply better to anybody, anywhere. The red part is just spending most of your time trying to find the tool you just set down. And it's true. A lot of these should be set up with my first cut, my second cut, new wood first cut, you know, that kind of thing. But this is the point, so this is the part I won't lose. And I don't know if anybody's ever used a lot of those glue applicator things. And again, if you came here to buy one, I think they're awesome. I can't find anything that works. You know, that little roller thing that everybody looks like they're using works the first second or two, but then glue gets stuck in the roller. So you spend most of your time trying to peel a roller off the appliance, then get the glue off of that and clean it up and put it back in again. And when that little opening that gets glue stuck in it gets stuck in it, you can't get the end out to clean it, and a little bit of stuff comes out. It's just worthless. This works really well. So here is the point. When I clamp this together, the boards already meet so nicely where all you're doing is putting a little bit of pressure to hold them together. Here's my 3 boards. You can see where the glue is coming out here. It's kind of touching on the clamps. It's not going to touch on the tapes, not on the clamps. The joints are closing up. I don't know if you can see it, but the grain lines are anywhere they feel like they need to be here. It doesn't make any difference at all. The issue is I will put them in these clamps. I make sure that all 4 feet are sitting on the ground. I make sure my boards are sitting parallel on these clamps. And as I tighten the handles to pull them together, as soon as that joint closes, I take the handles and turn them a half turn or 3/4 of a turn, and that's all. And nobody does that. You tighten the daylights out of a clamp, okay? In fact, your fingers are white trying to tighten it. They were making, a couple of years ago, they had a clamp in the show that our handle articulated. You could pull it out, stick it up, so now you get 2 hands on it. If you squeeze the daylights out of this, you can't make the board any narrower, okay? The board cannot deflect down because of this bar. The only place it goes is up, okay? So what you'll do is you'll take a F-clamp or spring clips and you'll clamp between the top of this and the bottom of the bar to bring it down. Or you spend another $30 a clamp and put clamps over the top of that glue up and crank the snot out of it up there and see if you can bend that back down again. And again, this is that human emotions thing. You told the board you wanted it up. You may have temporarily held it there while it was gluing, but what a surprise when you take the clamps off that ultimately that little bow comes back again. You think, come on, that's all that pressure you put on it. That little half or 3/4 is more than enough. The board's already met. Here's something that will make no sense for a second, but then you'll get it. Typebon about maybe 10 years ago or so did a little study because there was so many questions about glue that said that the pressure you need to put a softwood joint together is about 125 PSI, pounds per square inch, because softwood is a little bit more porous. It will absorb more glue through the edges, and it'll leave the glue line that Titebond felt is appropriate. Hardwood is more dense, so 175 PSI there, which again means nothing to anybody until I show you this. For the average woodworker, 250 PSI, 400, 1,000, and 1,250, and you're cranking the daylights out of this. And in your old pipe clamps, for those people that still have pipe clamps, you actually dented the boards on the side. You had to take them and rejoin them or recut them. I mean, that's what we did because you put so much pressure on. And again, in my work mind, if you put this under tension, something's got to relieve that tension. The board bowed up. It's the only place it could go. On the old pipe clamps, you actually bent the pipe. I don't know if anybody's ever had the little 1/2-inch pony pipe clamps. They're really pretty cool, but the pipe's actually bent if you try to do a real long glue up. This will stay nice and flat. So the key in this is just that turn is plenty. Here's that glue we were talking about before. Individual beads on the top, for all intents and purposes. Individual beads of glue on the bottom. A lot of you don't see that. You have newspapers and plastic bags on your workbench because you have so much glue on there. And now you're trying to get it off, which is worse yet. Okay? Here's what's going to bother you. And there's 2 different ways to do this. My favorite is to wash glue off. I know it breaks most of the rules. I have a 5-gallon bucket next to my bench. A rag in there that I get not soaking wet, but pretty wet. Wipe everything off the top edge in here, and then wipe it off the bottom edge here. Then go back into my bucket and rinse out that rag, squeeze out all the excess moisture, take out any excess water that may be sitting on the top, and I'm done. I don't have to think about it, don't have to do anything, and I just set it aside to cure or dry for whatever length of time it's going to be. A lot of people feel that that's going to ruin the glue line. I'm sorry, the glue joint, or it's going to leave glue in the joints or in the pores. This darker board here is probably the darkest one that I've got. So this is oak, and again, oak has a lot of deep pores, real big pores, where glue should sit. And I've got some dark lines in here, so hopefully it'll tell. And the finish that's on here is lacquer, so that would show up any glue squeeze out. There's nothing here, and all these joints are washed. And it's not like I made this 2 inches thick and then thickness planed an inch off of each side. It's just that that's what's happening. It's not going to cause a problem. It will if you have so much glue on the top that your bucket is yellow and your rag is slick. I mean, that's the issue. And a lot of you, that's what you have. And you keep washing it and you think that can't work. Well, you're right. You're better have to paint that. Don't try and stain it or anything because it's not going to work. So the point is that little bit of glue washes right off. And I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. So there is another way to do it, which is talked about quite a bit, and that's scraping it off, waiting for the glue to dry. This is a better picture to show you what I think the glue should look like. The glue in here, I prefer to have in what I would call a popcorn state. So it's not like a pimple, if you will, kind of hard on the outside and still soft on the inside, or that it's gotten real hard. If it is in that pimple type state, and you squeeze this off or scrape it off with a scraper or chisel or something like that, there's a potential that you can push that glue down into the pores there. You've actually forced it down there. That gets tighter, harder to get out. And if it's too dry, you glue up a bunch of boards and you can feel almost like a little edge on one of them. That's the most delicate part of any glue up, is that jointed edge. If some of that edge gets glue on it and it's dry, and you run that chisel or that putty knife down there and pull a sliver out of that, you will never sand that out. It's just so deep. So the point is, you have to wait for that, and that's the problem. The glue in general, finishes, glue, everything. All of the drying times, curing times, and everything are based on 70-degree temperature and between 50 and 70% humidity. So in the fall here, when it's cool and it's damp, it's going to take a long time for that glue to go popcorn on you. But during the summertime, especially in the mid-summer time, when, like us, the temperature is in the 90s and humidity is pretty low, it could be in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it's already getting a hard thing on it. The problem there is you have to watch it. Now again, there's nothing wrong with either technique. This one I think you have to pay it more attention to. In mine, you just wash it and you're done with it. Okay, last thing. No matter what I do with these, when I'm done with it, they go back in those stickers like we talked about beforehand. I put water on here, I wash that board, I put water on the surface, it's gotta get out of there. Even if you glue it and scrape it, the glue, and don't hold me to this, but maybe 1/8 of an inch into the pores on either side, You temporarily pucker that wood. There's enough moisture that gets in there. It's got to come out. And during the fall, it's going to take longer. Some of you will glue up something. You take the clamps off and you throw that on your workbench. Then you glue up the next one. And funny, the next morning, that bows back. There's a little bit of a bow to it because the moisture couldn't get out of the bottom side. So I just sticker it for a day or two. Let it sit there. Usually a day is plenty. But let it sticker get all that moisture out. It causes a lot less problems when it's nice and dry. Okay, so I've jointed this on a table saw. I washed the glue joints off, hardly put any pressure on this, didn't do anything that you're supposed to do, no biscuits, no dowels, no splines. And here's the idea. When I broke this board, the one that we've been showing in these pictures, it still would not break in the grain line, or in the glue line. It broke on a flaw in the wood, or a character flaw in the material or something like that. So this is what happened here. And I did actually I had my wife do it. Apologize for the quality of this, but you'll get the idea. This is how everybody tests their glue up just to see if it's strong enough. You all do this, I'm sure, just when you're done with your thing. I don't think I was babying this much at all. That's what it took to break that, and that's the piece that we're showing here. Not on the glue line at all. And I could tell you, oh yeah, there's biscuits, there's dowels, there's dominoes for $900 tool. All of that stuff in there wouldn't have made that glue joint any stronger. And with washing the glue joint, no glue in the pores or anything, none of that stuff, none of that affected that glue. My feeling is, and again, for what it's worth, is that over time, we have let tools and things get in the way of what joinery actually was. I mean, we're finding something else to add to this mix, when really all you need are two edges that meet, and the smoother the better, and a clamp system that just holds it that way. The new glues are exceptionally strong. They tell you now glues are stronger than the wood. It's true. They just will not break where you would think they would. So if you're doing all the other stuff and it works, and you've got your biscuits and you're thrilled with them, or whatever technique you're doing, and that's fine with you, then please ignore all of this. But if the stuff you're doing isn't working quite well, or you've had something separate or whatever on, I just feel that this works. And again, no scientific proof, all experimental, if you will. But the idea is that this kind of brings people back to the original idea behind gluing boards up. And again, these should be all over the place. They should, for all intents and purposes, they should be warped and twisted and all that stuff in there. They're perfect. Yes, sir?
How long do you normally